Thankful Throwback Thursday. Today, we are going to be finishing up our journey with Miss Ida B. Wells, amazing activist who opened the world's eyes to what was going on to the Black community in the South. So, a very quick recap on Miss Ida B. Wells. She published issues about race and politics in the South. One of her first fights was at a train station where she refused to give up her seat and move back to the smoking car because she had paid for a first-class seat. She was forced off of the train by the train workers, and she had a group of white onlookers who all cheered, and she fought back against these people. And so while this was going on, she was fighting. She actually bit at one of the employees who was carrying her off, and she ended up suing the train system, and she won that settlement. She actually ends up getting about $500. However, she gets all of that overturned. So she has this wonderful win, and then it is overturned by the Tennessee Supreme Court. And so this is what really leads her to start writing about the injustices that were being faced in the Black community. She later moves to Memphis, where she becomes a teacher, and she's an amazing teacher. She starts speaking out about what she is seeing, the inequalities she is seeing as a teacher. So when she starts speaking out and saying, hey, my kiddos are not getting the same things as the kids over there, they actually fire her. And that was around 1891. And she does not give up there. She does not let getting fired, losing the settlement, she does not let any of that get her down. And she just keeps fighting. So in 92, she starts going around the country and she starts publishing, this is 1892, by the way, she starts publishing different articles about the lynchings that she was seeing going on, but she was doing this under a pseudonym. So she had to do it under a pseudonym because she was fearful of what might happen to her. So keep in mind the KKK is really notable during this time for going after activists, which is something that she was trying to avoid. And then we have the terrible story of Mr. Thomas Moss. And we have three major human beings who were involved in this tragedy. Thomas Moss, Calvin McDowell, and Will Stewart. All three of these men, they actually had created a business called the People's Grocery Store, and it was drawing a lot of the customers away from the white businesses. So when this happens, they stay at their business to protect it. People come to destroy the business. There are vandals who come. So these vandals were coming up to the store to destroy it, and they ended up having guns to protect themselves. And when all of this went down, they ended up getting brought to jail, but they never actually make it to trial. So lynchings actually were a way of helping to control people and control their mindset, because when you see someone who is speaking out or someone who is standing up for themselves and then they end up getting shot down or end up getting attacked by a mob of people, and there were some pretty terrible things that happened to them, that would make a lot of people back down from the things that they believed in. But our wonderful Ida B. Wells, she refuses to back down. And so when she sees her dear friend getting murdered, she goes and she spends about 2 months traveling all over the South, gathering other evidence of other lynchings, other accounts, other human beings' names. She gives the names, the dates, the details of all of these people who are being murdered. And finally, she ends up leaving to go to New York City. And when she makes it to New York City, she finds out that her publication, her newspaper, everything was destroyed. And she is very disheartened. But when she gets into New York City, she does not let that hold her back either. So she just had her life's work kind of get torn down in Memphis. She can't return to Memphis because she's scared that if she does, she will be put to death. They pretty much published the thought that if she returns or if she publishes anything else, that they could kill her. And so she stays in New York City and she works for another African American newspaper. This is another newspaper that is publishing a lot of the injustices, and that is about where our story is going to pick up. So to kind of recap with where we're at, she has just made it into New York City and she is meeting a man named Thomas Fortune. He is a New York newspaper editor. Fortune met her at the train station. "Well, I've been trying for a long time to get you to New York," he said, "but now that you're here, I'm afraid you'll have to stay." Ida said, "I don't understand what you mean." "That ruckus you kicked up in Memphis, when I heard about it, I knew it had to be you because it sounded so like you." Ida was totally bewildered. "What are you talking about?" "Haven't you seen the morning newspaper?" Fortune asked. "No." He handed her a copy of the New York Sun. A group of Memphis citizens had stormed the office of the Free Speech during the night. They had destroyed all equipment and run Ida's business partner, J.L. Fleming, out of town. They left a note among the ruins. Anybody who tried to publish the paper again would be punished by death. Alarmed, Ida sent a telegram to her lawyer to find out if her partner was safe. Friends sent letters and telegrams back to her. Fleming had escaped Memphis unharmed. Her friends begged her not to return, since white men with guns were watching the train stations and her house. They had orders to kill her on sight. Ida B. Wells never went home. She stayed in New York, then moved to Chicago, where she married Ferdinand Barnett, a lawyer and journalist. Ida devoted the rest of her life to investigating, reporting, and lecturing on the growing number of lynchings of Black citizens. She toured England twice and became famous in America and England for her anti-lynching crusade. Her speeches raised the consciousness of the nation. Condemnation from the North, as well as England, forced Southerners to first justify lynchings, then publicly to deplore it. Between 1893 and 1898, several Southern states passed anti-lynching laws. The day that Ida B. Wells heard the horrible news about her friend Thomas Moss was the day that changed her life forever. Experience had taught her that strength and courage was what she needed for her life. She needed both of those for her tireless and fearless work, telling the nation about the crimes against the Black citizens and asking U.S. courts to punish the perpetrators. Change came slowly. It wasn't until decades after her death in 1931 that the lynchings of Black people almost completely stopped. In 1942, a Gallup poll showed that a majority of Americans favored making lynching a federal crime. Ida launched the movement that changed public sentiment and led to the time when the atrocities would end. Personal tragedy inspired Ida B. Wells to work heroically to bring about justice for her people. And so this does come from The Story of Ida B. Wells by Shannon Moreau. This was reprinted and is published on Common Lit if you would like to read that story again. So she actually passed away in 1931, and this Gallup poll that states that most Americans wanted to end lynchings and wanted it to be a federal crime doesn't happen for another 10 years after she passes away. But Ida's journey was pretty outstanding. Ida B. Wells Barnett, she was the founding member of the National Association of Colored Women. So if you've never heard of that, that is kind of the organization that focused on women and empowering women and helping Black women to have a voice in America. And that also helps lead to the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, or the NAACP. So the NAACP is still very important in today's society. They fight any of the crimes against Black people, crimes against people of color. They have lawyers set up, they have activists set up. So all of this started with her time period. And Ida B. Wells was one of the main founders of this. Her father, kind of interesting fact, was actually an activist as well. And he worked for a college, and he helped to start one of the first HBCUs called Rust College. And those were the only institutions where Black people could actually attend college during this time period. So her father helping to form that helped Ida kind of get her voice when she was growing up before he passed away. When she becomes the primary caregiver of her 5 siblings, she also still tries to go to college, and that's when she ends up becoming a school teacher. She does see a whole bunch of lynchings. She sees people who are supposed to be going to trial and are never making it to trial, and she speaks out. So typically, when you have a lynching, the victims are not charged with a crime, but sometimes they are, and sometimes the constables or the police officers or the people in charge would actually release these people to the mobs. Now, in the case of her 3 friends, she knew that this was going to anger the white communities because they were already angry that they had Black store owners who were taking away their business. And that's kind of part of the reason why those human beings ended up getting murdered. So she ends up publishing under her pseudonym, which is Iola. And she does this in a lot of other Black newspapers before she finally gathers up the courage, or I guess it would be kind of the fearlessness, to publish under her own name. She is one of the founding members, along with Harriet Tubman, Mary Church Terrell, Francis E.W. Harper, and all of these people are people that you should be studying. These are people that you should know about, because these human beings have played such a magnificent role in what our country is today. Because of them leading the fight, we have a much more equal society today. Okay, shh, okay, shh. Okay, can you be quiet for a minute? Just 1 minute. She works on the Britain and... Yep, just 1 minute. Shh, okay. Almost done. Mommy's almost done. Okay, can you finish coloring for Mommy? I love you. I love you most. Yes, I do. Okay, let me finish, okay? Let me finish. In 1894, she works on the Britain Anti-Lynching Society, which gets together similar people like Frederick Douglass, who had also traveled to England to get abolishment support. And she works with a lot of these people who have already come overseas, who have already tried to get together groups to change American society, to change the injustices they have seen. And she goes overseas to kind of garner support and gather more people to kind of persuade the American South to stop acting the way they are acting and stop harming the Black community. Then in 1895, she finally publishes The Red Record. This specifies thousands of deaths and helps the Northerners understand what was really happening. She also raised awareness about how many lynchings were for just challenging white supremacy. So this was really an issue that was going on, people who would stand up and let their voices be heard. She actually published the Red Record, which specified thousands of deaths and helped the Northerners understand what was really happening in America. She's able to raise awareness about how many lynchings were just for opposing white supremacy. And a big number that is going on during this time period and is really horrific to hear is that between 1877 and 1950, over 4,000 Black Americans were lynched or murdered. And these are only the known numbers. So there are a lot of cases that do not actually get publicized. So she joins all of these women. Cut here. In 1895, she finally publishes the Red Record. This specifies thousands of deaths, and it gives all of the details, the specifics of who was killed, what led to their murder, and it really opens up the eyes of the Northern communities to let them understand what was really going on in the South. She also raises awareness about how many lynchings were for challenging white supremacy. So a lot of the human beings who were speaking up and trying to find equality for their community end up being put down through lynchings. And these lynchings kind of set an example and keep people held in terror. And then between 1877 and 1950, this statistic is absolutely horrific. But there were over 4,000 Black Americans that were lynched or murdered during this time period. And so these are only the known numbers. So any of the ones that were not reported or any of the ones that were not recorded, they would not be included in that number. And so Ida B. Wells and the people that she worked with were really instrumental in saving so many people's lives. And when she finally joins together with Harriet Tubman and Frances Harper and Mary Church Terrell, and she founds all of these different associations, she is creating groundbreaking work that is going to change the face of America. She actually goes so far as in 1898 to organize a protest where they go to the White House and they are raising awareness against the discrimination that Black Americans are facing in employment when they're trying to find jobs. And that is going to lead to a lot of the laws that we currently have today that are kind of foundational in ending discrimination in the hiring processes. So overall, her historic and heroic journey lives on today as we still have many of these foundational associations available to us. And a lot of people are alive today because this woman stood up and fought for justice. So I always like to end you with some extensions if you want to study further. There were some major names that I would definitely recommend you look into. Harriet Tubman was one of them. I will try to do a video on her in the near future. But if you would like to dig in a little deeper with Ida B. Wells, here are some extension activities you can work on. So number one, what are the effects of prejudice? This is very similar to what we saw in Martin Luther King Jr. You are going to think about examples from society or from our stories. So think about everything she went through and think about how prejudice impacted her life. The next extension activity is to write a summary of how people create lasting change in the world. And I would want you to use examples from this text as well as information from one or two other inspirational figures. So if you are in my class, you have definitely studied Frederick Douglass. That would be an amazing motivational and inspirational figure that you could use for this summary. The other one, of course, could be Ida B. Wells. So when you are working on this summary, always remember, who wants what? But so then. What gets in the way of these people's progress as they are trying to create lasting change? That would be the central idea that you are developing in your summary. And the final one, what characteristics make a person a hero? Cite 2 examples from this text and or others. So you can think about Frederick Douglass, you can think about Harriet Tubman, you could even think about Martin Luther King Jr. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was definitely considered a hero. What characteristics help to form the idea of him being a hero? And you want to make sure that you are using your RACES response. Restate, answer, cite, explain, and summarize. If you have any questions, please make sure to ask your teacher.